cigarette smoking in my room. Yeah. I still want Marley. Bless FM radio, play good tunes.
From the mystical breeze in the morning till the dawning of a new day.
Greetings everybody and welcome to the Sista Lil show on Bless FM. That's 92.9 FM. Or for those of you who can't get it on the dial, it's www.blessradio.org. Now in tonight's show we have a guest, and that is Brother Theo in the studio with us here tonight. But before we start our reasoning, which will be an aspect of life that is important to all of us, I'll start with playing you the first track by Robert Dallas, and it's called Vision and Dub, and this one is on Channel 1 Records. We also want to say we give thanks to the Most High for bringing us through this far in the week so that we're able to come together, and I thank you for those who've got their ears listening to us tonight. So this is Robert Dallas and it's called Visions of Dub on Channel 1 Records.
I see my dreams come true, my dream has come true. Jah so bless me. I run through my vision, Jah make the decision. I work through my vision, Jah make the decision. He lead I to the right direction. I follow his instruction. vision. Jah make the decision. I have to follow Jah decision, 'cause it's in my vision. He lead me on the right track, and there is no turning back. No, no, no. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. I would never let go.
You're in tune to bless me, tune to bless me.
I'm holding on strong. I trust and believe in Joe. That's why I not let go. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. He lead us to the right direction. I have to follow his instruction. I see my dreams come true. He make it happen for me and you. It's my vision. It's just vision. I follow his instruction. I would never let go.
Bless radio, bless radio. You're in tune to bless me, tune to bless me.
I work through my vision. Jah make the decision. He lead us to the right direction. I follow his instruction. I see my dreams come true. He made it happen for me and you.
This is Sugar Minot and it's Wrong Move, Right Move. Many of us are making the wrong move and we need to start making the right moves.
You see them over here, yes, you see them over there. Yes, they're moving like they just don't care. Some of them are hide and some of them are peep. Yes, some of them are live in fear. Wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. Watch them with the gun in them. Wrong move. All of them are make wrong move. Instead they want to shut up the land. Wrong move up abroad, wrong move down a yard. Yes, some of them are camouflage, but if the night should turn today, a lot of them would run away because of wrong move. A lot of them are make wrong move. See them with the gun in them. Wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. Say them want to kill them brother man, but this king done posse them no love the wrong move. God that them move can make you improve. This king done posse them no love the wrong move. God that they move and you bound to lose. Wrong move. A lot of them are make wrong move. See them with the gun in them. Wrong move. There's some of them are make wrong move. Say they want to kill them brother man. They have a little eye dream them call him Rex. Be wrong move. Bless inner him.
You're in tune to bless.
People don't talk. Go in a shop and them a call him robber. In a the dance him a coke sniffer. Out on the road him a rock seller. A wrong move. Yes, some of them a make wrong move. You see them with the gun in a them a wrong move. A lot of them a make wrong move. Say them want to mash up the land. Wrong move, better improve your stop making screw. Hey, you see them over here, you see them over there, moving and them moving like them just don't care. Some of them are hide, some of them are peep. Yes, some of them are live in fear. Wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. See what she done? Wrong move. I know say you're the wrong move. Say you want to kill them brother man. Wrong move in a yard. Wrong move up abroad. Oh yes, I know you're a camouflage. But if night should turn today, a lot of them would run away because of wrong move. A lot of them are make wrong move. See them with the gun in a them wrong move. Yes, some of them are make wrong move. Night them fall, kill them brother man. Promotion posse them no make wrong move. Cause that the little move can make you improve.
Bless Radio. You're in tune to Bless Radio.
This one is Sister Benji and the Signal One Band. It's called In the House of the Father. This one is going out to Nariba and to Changa. You're enjoying the sun. This next track that I'm going to play for you is by one of our local musicians and is called Barry Drat, and this is a track that is especially beautiful, and it is called Dub Up Your Mind by Barry Drat.
Free up your mind. airplane.
Yes, that's it. A free mind is what we're trying to achieve on Bless Radio 2.9 FM. It's more than time to make a change. Make a change. Free up your mind. Freeing your mind is something that, as Barry Dread has sung in his track on here, the last track of his album. It's called Up Up Your Mind. It's exactly true. That's what we want to achieve, is getting ourselves into a state of freedom. Now, I'm going to play you one last track before Brother Theo and I actually start communicating on tonight's subject, and the subject is, how do we live in a clean psychological life? So before we get into that, the last track before Brothers Theo and I, who is actually in the studio with us tonight, Brother Theo.
Yes, good evening, Sister Lil, and all the blessed listeners. Yes, I'm here. I'll be joining, and I'll be speaking on the subject later on. So the other side of the record, I'll be here.
Stay tuned in. So this is called Professor Skank, featuring Africa Simba, and it's called What is Rasta. The reason why I'm playing this is because there's been a lot of talk about what Rasta is, and because we are doing a show to do with having a clean psychological life, I think this track is quite fitting. Some of you may not agree, but here we go. Professor Skank featuring Africa Simba, and it is called What is Rasta.
Yes, fire blaze. Enough ones and ones that present the question, and I come with the answer. No need to listen to any propaganda. Them a ask, what is Rasta? People don't ask, what is Rasta? And I come with the answer. Rasta is the totality of a life's experience, and the more the experience grow, the more Rasta is enriched. The life of a Rasta is reflected in history and projected into time. Rasta is the spiritual material foundation of liberty, prophetic realization. Rasta is the result of a search. What is Rasta? Rasta is a means of entering into the heaven, arcing man of togetherness. What is Rasta? Rasta is a people projecting their image onto the world. What is Rasta? Rasta is worshiping the Almighty Creator as a constant manifestation. What is Rasta? Rasta is giving thanks and praise unto the Most High Jah Rastafari. Certain things like drumming or smoking or brown nation, that is Naya Bingi session, can and have been done at special time and place. But one should not believe that these are ritual and that they take precedence over anything else I and I do. For I and I know that in Jah sight, all acts are equal. I Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, is I and I Messiah and leader. Wherever he leads, I and I follow, for he's I and I eternal Father. What is Rasta? Rasta want to repatriate love to Africa to build Rasta society. What is Rasta? Rasta do not expect to die and go to heaven somewhere in the sky. What is Rasta? Rasta says Africa is the place most appropriate for I and I works. What is Rasta? Rasta want to do plenty works to regain the strength that was lost. Rasta want to achieve with the aid of I brothers and sisters strength and power for Africa, so that its voice can be heard in the fears of the world. Rasta want to achieve peace and love amongst all people. I and I also want to achieve justice, equality, truth and rights.
That's it. Justice, equality, truth and rights. Spiritual freedom and walking within the spirit. So as the track said, by Professor Skank featuring Africa Simba, Rasta has always been saying from the time I can remember as a child, and I hear of the same thing before I came along, that it is one area within the diaspora whereby we do, or many have, the ones that have come before us, have actually stood their ground and been very faithful to walking in spirit and being in tune and in connection to the source. So the question I'm going to start off with was, how do we live a clean psychological life? Why do we need to look into this? Why do we think that this is even remotely important? Well, having a clean psychological life means that you have a free spiritual space in which to develop and free yourselves from the clutches. Free yourselves from the clutches of karma. there are several areas that impact this. So one of them being, for example, slavery. One of them being our interpersonal relationships. One of them being our own take on things. So our own energy and where it lies. So I don't know, for those of you who listened into last week's show, it was about the ego personality. And we need that space so that we can be free as a group of people who are trying to move forward. So what does it mean to be spiritually free? How do we achieve this when life is an emotional roller coaster? Are we free when are we able to be free when can we damp down our emotions that disrupt our natural flow of work or our relationships? Are we free when we have permissions to express any and all emotion? Are we free if we don't experience any emotion to an extreme degree, but keep things more tempered and even? Or are we free when we experience mostly only the positive emotions, such as excuse me, bliss or peace, rather than the negative ones, such as anger or anxiety? And one might ask, what do your emotions have to do with spiritual freedom? Or, you know, why are we making that connection? Well, I'm making that connection because in the space of having a clean psychological mind, the first thing that we have to look at is ourselves. And ourselves is about the spiritual space that we operate in order to, you know, manifest who we are. And there are many ways in which we can look at the baseline of trying to attain this spiritual freedom. For example, we're often taught to value reason and self-control rather and rational planning, actually. Yet for many of us, the experience of spiritual awakening introduced to us is on a deeper awareness of the interior of our lives. Now, with all of its different arenas, its nuances, its facets, all those different areas, having that deep sense, that deep inquiry, I guess you would say, deep inquiry of this part of our being. And, you know, there are several spiritual exercises that encourages us to have full engagement with the physical senses, with spiritual devotion, with what we could generally call, I guess we could call it intuition, with our deep down desires and with our interior movements, including emotions. So what would you have to say, Brother Theo, on this subject of, you know, having a clean psychological space?
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. At that very point you were speaking, I was just kind of like dwelling on that very last point there about speaking about freedom, you know, and then connecting that with the whole emotional drive, you see. So when it comes down to like the clean, when you put it like that in the psychological sense, which then to a certain extent ties in and also relates to, you know, the psyche being more descriptive of our kind of what we call our soul.
Yes.
You know, our actual innate sense of balance that we should all, or generally all, have. So the whole idea there is to always keep, you know, keep your mind or your psychological space, as you put it, as the opposite of being as disorderly as possible. If it's in an orderly manner, then of course things can proceed at a much smoother and effortless way, rather than if there's a whole lot of clutter. So and all of that, really, as you said, ways of, you know, clearing that space, you know, is through spiritual practice. It's our spirituality that's supposed to lead us to our sense of virtue.
Yes.
You see, and then when it comes down to being focused and driven, it's that aspect that will feed into that in order to because we're talking about a state here, and that's if you look at it in that way, it's a boundary, and there should always be kept
separate, yeah.
There always needs to be a defense is kept about that.
Yes.
To ensure that it can always proceed in an orderly way. Not necessarily in a rational way, but orderly.
Orderly, yeah. I mean, just so the listeners have a bit of insight as to why I got to this point, I've spent quite a bit of time in and out of nursing homes, and also I've read quite a bit about people who've been on and talked to people from those experiences who've been unfortunately had a sentence and were in prison, or people who've given testimonies of how they feel on death row, or elderly people who know they're about to exit this plane. And the thing that they have in common is that all of these areas, people start to do a lot of reflecting. They suddenly are not on the treadmill, on life's treadmill, and so the space and the time, and there's no, you can't really do anything else when you're just trapped in four walls. You start to reflect and start to analyze your past relationships, things that you've done, and different behaviors that you've contributed in your daily goings on. And people have a lot of, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd behaved like this instead during these times. And while we are not on that last hour or those last few hours, it's a good chance for all of us to actually address these issues and start this reflecting on these things, so that we can actually free ourselves from any karmic clutches, so that we can operate in a freedom within our psychologies, so our mind is free. So if your interpersonal relationships are positive, if things have happened and you've not talked about it and these things are festering for years, you see these people on their exiting from this plane, they're sat there and it's festering, and spiritually they're not leaving this plane in a good vibration. They're distressed, they have a lot on their mind, they wish they could say sorry to this person, they wish that they could change the dynamics of their behavior, all when it's almost too late. So that's why I came to this subject matter of having a clean psychological space, because of the things that I've seen with people. And I bring it up because the interior freedom, spiritual freedom, requires particular focus. Because as this kind of engagement is really about the focus of spiritual exercises that we need to put into place. Freedom, I say interior freedom, and we touched on it before. You might say, what do you mean by freedom? Well, freedom actually asks that we learn how to discern our personal interior movements of our souls. And if we want to be truly free, we will have to acknowledge our emotions, receive them, feel them, and reflect on them. And that's the only way to understand your own disposition and how you might respond to certain things, so that you can put a cap on any kind of behaviors that will cause a domino effect, so that you can go through life in this clean spiritual space. What would you say, Brother Theo, there?
Yeah, as you was going through that, the thing about it, what I was thinking there is that I'm trying to get back to the point where you were speaking about the. What I'm trying to remember. Okay, let me try and remember what you were saying, because I was writing something in the middle of you bringing me in. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and track back through my thinking there. So, in reference to those individuals that you've come across, you've encountered, and in those situations, you see, and you said, it's that point in which they're looking to kind of reconcile certain matters that weren't dealt with at an
When they
earlier,
have the chance,
at an earlier point, and when it's like almost too late. And I was wondering if it came to the point where, you see, they were free to do that at that point, but it was only then they was actually in a position, or only kind of occurred to them that was the point where maybe it might even be that, slightly differing in that they might not still be holding on to stuff. It might be that they're just finally realizing they can just let go of it.
Yeah, that's true.
See?
It definitely has been a combination of both expressions.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking that, and, painful though the experiences towards the conclusion of that point may be, there's still that sense of release, and that might even be the driving force and the passion behind the wish to reconcile these things, even in the sense that they recognize that by passing on that gesture, as you said, that can reverberate in an existence that they've left behind, and that may leave them all but assured if they can actually start that process.
Yeah, they start it in their minds. However, because of the disposition, so somebody who may be on death row, or somebody who may be elderly and about to exit this planet. Now, yes, there are those who have reconciled those things within their minds, but there are many who die in a lot of spiritual pain. Because they don't address those things when they can. And, it's not until, perhaps for some, it's not until that situation happens. No, you don't have to be elderly for death to be knocking on your door. So it can happen at any time to anyone. And this is why it's so important. We see what's going on socially, culturally within this country, of how things are playing out on an everyday basis. Elders are being shipped up, these sorts of things. Elders are being taken away. So are also some people's children. I have heard yet again another case of somebody who doesn't know why they've been accused of certain things, and all 4 children were removed from them this week. Just through certain busybody teachers who are making wild speculations without any formal training in the areas that they're complaining about. Now, getting back to so another aspect of this before we leave Earth is when I just touched on it before, talking about these clean spaces and actually finding the time to deal with our personal interior. Now, emotions are powerful tools and can actually be used as tools in the spiritual life. They are indicators of what's happening to us. Would you say that, Theo? They are indicators of what's happening within who we are as a being, our emotions.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So the thing I was actually thinking about is that when it comes down to the whole idea of who a person feels they are, or knows they are, or assumes that they are, I think maybe if that's where you're going with all of it, then that's gonna reflect in their interior life. But it's also gonna project outwards, because our interpersonal relationships never happen in this vacuum. So then, when you say about those effects they will reflect themselves not just inwardly with them, but then also outwardly.
Yes, it definitely would be outwardly also, not just this internal battle, but it's also outwardly, because on a daily basis we have to interact with other people. And so as we are energy, we also should realize that we can be energy benders, because you can walk into a room and you can feel the vibration within that space, and it can bend the energy of that room. You know, for example, you can have several people in a space. Somebody may not be very amicable, and it lowers the tone. You know, we have these things lowering the tone. That's because it's where our energy is a frequency that is colliding with another frequency and causing disruption. So even though you're saying, yeah, it's just an internal thing, those internal things actually manifest out. It has a domino effect in that way, because energy moves through living thing, you know, it moves through things. So if energy moves through things, how does your energy move through the atmosphere and affect others? Hopefully it should be in a positive way, because while we are on this plane, we want to have a positive life experience.
Everybody wants that.
Well,
going back to so look, let's go back to the room now. Let's go back to the room, and then there's a few antagonistic individuals in the room, and so you know that generates outwards, that projects. The only thing I would say is, like, in terms of the energy respect, it's not so much, you know. When you said the word collision, I thought to myself, okay, that was almost like a reflection of the people themselves who are responding to that energy.
Yes, exactly.
So the energy itself, rather than collides, they respond to one another, and then that feeds back. Yeah,
because they're both energy beings.
That's it. And then where the clean psychological state comes in is then that's how the individual, based on who they feel they are, their essential ontology, as I like to put it, dictates how they respond to them receiving that.
But then having a clean spiritual space means that you are able just to observe these emotions as powerful tools. You can observe because really we really should be learning to accept them as gifts in our human experience, so that we can begin to work with them in spiritual, healthy ways by reflecting and observing them, so that we understand what that response is, so that you start to build a picture of your emotional graph. So how do you respond in this situation, that situation? So when I go into this situation, this is my natural response. Why is that my natural response? Why have I just had a rant at that person because of something that they said to me? Why? When there wasn't anything to fuel an actual argument. So it's, and then, you know, you can have those interactions, and people, it can happen even in families, between mother and daughter and mother and son, father and son, father, and so on in all our relationships. So that domino effect is when you start, this domino effect and the effects of what all of the different incidences that people can think about has that domino effect, whereby you then end up with and why I say collision is because there isn't harmony at the end. At the end you end up with two disgruntled people, one maybe more than the other, and that is not having a clean psychological space, because people can carry those things on for years and years and years, rather than actually dealing with the issue with that individual. It could be a parent, it could be a sibling, it could be an old-time friend, it could be a grandma, it could be somebody down the road, any of your connections, you know, within your circle or outer circle. But it's still you're carrying that energy of that end catalyst. At the end of that catalyst, you're carrying that energy with you, and you're carrying those thoughts which are harboring and creating seeds within you that manifest at different emotions on different levels. So this is what I mean when I was saying it has a collision, an energy collision with the receiver. And yes, I think it's really important to consider how you've dealt with your emotions, how others taught you to deal with them. So how were you taught to deal with those emotions? How were you taught to respond? When I say taught, I'm not just talking from a parental perspective, taught from the immediate environment during your development stages. How were you taught to respond by the mirroring of adults? How have you in fact worked with them? Have you looked at those areas? Have we, addressed those things that are rising in us? Many of us have lived a combination of engagement and avoidance, in the areas of emotions, in trying to identify our own patterns. So there are some emotions that people might not feel comfortable with addressing.
Well, yeah, because when it comes down to that, I mean, you asked the question, how do you deal with the emotions? Have everyone been taught? No one's really been adequately instructed on how to, deal with their emotions or what they are, or even to be kind of discerning of them and the effects that they have. When it comes down to how to deal with certain situations, what I'm thinking here, what I feel is that the more familiar one becomes with dealing with things, then it becomes almost like a point where if you find yourself in a situation, there's an anticipatory factor, depending on how well you've developed yourself in dealing with certain situations. So you can almost see ahead during a conversation that you might envisage is going to become heated or antagonistic. You can see it already. Maybe the other person involved can't, but you can see it. So that at that point there is the juncture at which you move into the next phase of, after anticipating the sorry course it might go down. There you can intervene based on your background, your experience, your awareness, your discernment. You see it from that, and then in those areas where psychologically, you're saying, we're not that adequately prepared, that's when the emotion kicks in. That's when whatever people train themselves to think is instinctual manifests itself.
Is it instinctual? That's a good.
Well, that's why I said it just before people feel that it's instinctual, but more often than not, it actually isn't.
Yeah.
You see.
Yeah, and this is why I was saying, learn that looking at things that we've been taught from our, not just our homes, but from our external environment, the educational system, our larger society as well, because especially within the adolescent stages, we are taught a lot from the outer world rather than from within our own family units and cultural units. But during the early development stages, by that I mean childhood, primary ages and stuff, there is still the space for a child to develop a healthy, balanced understanding of themselves, with the correct guidance, because that's really an important goal and outcome to have that free psychological space. And what I do admire within that is some of these elders who, not all of them, were sat on their exit out being disgruntled about certain situations. There are some who are free spiritually and have manifested great personas and given a lot to the world, but such spiritual well-being is also implicitly assumed by the Human Rights Act, which includes the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, which is Article 18. And in the West, such freedom requires education that fosters development of spiritual freedom, as we were just talking about. But what spiritually means to people can be determined through experimental research. However, so within within the Western understanding, we're taught to measure our emotions through facts and figures, whilst in actual fact the nature of spiritual freedom itself can be understood and experienced only through one's own thinking. So you have to do that internal researching and that internal fact-finding of yourself. So before we go into a little bit more on that reasoning, I am actually going to play you I'm going to actually play you a track, and it's called ABBA Originals by Original Hero and Hero's Dub. Theo and I will be back after 2 tracks. So here we go with this one.
Yeah. Peace. A man tell a peace cover the earth as water cover the seas, you know. Yeah, as it was written, so it shall be done. Majesty. Give thanks continually for the giving of thanks, you know. Last year, the first.
This one is going out to Beacon, Darrell and Deck, down there in the Midlands.
Yes, it was written, so it shall be done. Majesty. Give thanks continually for the giving of thanks, you know. Last year, the first.
Happy anniversary, Bingy Man.
Thanks and praise unto the Most High's Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie first. Conquering life in the tribe of Judah, Earth's rightful ruler. Just sit upon his throne of glory, glory, yeah, yeah, yeah. Got to praise Jah night and day, yeah, yeah. Rastafari is the element of surprise. Come for wipe out all the matter from I and eyes. Babylonian, then them off the Lego, them disguise. Can no longer can the truth be hidden from I and I. See them continue with them folly and them lies. Can the truth is exactly Babylonian despise, but can they upon the earth? You know they in the sky. The truth it has revealed, so I and I feel realize. And I praise him, God and King. Holy, 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 hallelujah. I praise him, God and King. Praise him, the Lion of Judah. And I give thanks and praise unto the Most High's Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie first. Conquering life in the tribe of Judah, Earth's rightful ruler. Just sit upon his throne of glory, glory, yeah, yeah, yeah. Got to praise Jah night and day, yeah, yeah. Rastafari is the element of surprise. Come for wipe out all the matter from I and eyes. Babylonian, then them off the Lego, them disguise.
That's it, Archangel. That was the last track, Archangel, Word Cry by African Simba. Praise him, because many of us need to, and many of us do, set aside time for meeting the Creator or being at one with energy and source. So it's a really important practice to have in place. For those of you who don't have that viewpoint, then practice what is beneficial to yourself. So as Brother Theo and I were talking about having a clean psychological space, life, a clean psychological life in relationship to needing to have a clean spiritual space in order to achieve a clean psychological life. So we were touched on earlier different areas, and one of the things we were talking about is actually seeing our emotions as a gift and dealing with them and what they foster on all different levels, so that we can start to understand how we are manifesting the domino effects that we are creating or not creating, possibly, but really beginning to understand ourselves as on a broader perspective, because we always deal with a lot of things on the physical plane, but we don't deal as quickly because it's more challenging for us, because we're conditioned to this physical mindset when really we're spiritual beings, and it's dealing with the spirit, as many of you already know, that is most important. Now, there are many practical ways for us to start to free ourselves from this, these spiritual prisons. So one of them is, as we were just saying before, for those of you who've only just joined us, is to do some deep reflection. So it's about making space to reflect about where you are in life, and where you want to be. So simple steps for reflection can be to talk, even just simple things like talking to a trusted friend or spiritual mentor, or creating a new rhythm for life. By that I mean a rhythm of life is a simple statement of personal habits that you choose to practice to intentionally center your life on loving the source of energy, and then in turn turning it into life energy, because once you're tuned in, you're embraced with love, and so you are able to output that in different arenas as you journey through life. As also reassess, even if you've done it before, it's always good to reassess your current spiritual rhythms. Ask when you say ask, what you're talking about, ask the Creator, ask your inner, the energy that's running through you as the creative energy. Ask for guidance. Ask to start understanding who you are. And we are given spiritually a lot of space to practice these habits and to make time for this, because we are given challenges on a regular basis to help us to sharpen. Yeah, it might be a tough time, it might be a trial, but these things actually help to sharpen us spiritually if we're tuned into what's actually going on. Many situations are a test. Yeah.
They most certainly are. I didn't expect you to stop there. So
no, well, I've got go.
I mean, they all are. That last point there is quite relevant in that so often it's taken that a challenging situation is approached in the sense that, you know, the outcome is going to be detrimental, rather than something that can be
very positive and healing, no?
Absolutely. Learned from, really, was the thing I was going to be saying. So in that learning, and as a result of the learning process, then a like situation would never pose the same kind of threatening challenge, that it would be assessed by the standards it would be assessed by the previous time around. You know, so it becomes not just a personal growth for the individual, but one that can be, you know, reflected beyond themselves.
Yes.
Which is really the goal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, reassessing your current spiritual rhythms. Another thing that many of us forget to do, not all, obviously there are many people who do this, and it's practicing gratitude. One of the things that I heard from a young lady once, which was really nice, and I say young because she's not quite out of her teenage years. And she had a thing that she was doing with her grandma, and it was to create a gratitude list in a journal, and they had it like on their wall, on a wall. She was doing it for the grandma so they could have like a wall with things to be grateful for, because they'd lost so many people, immediate family members, in not a pleasant experience at all. And so it was a very inspirational thing to see a young teenager actually creating a gratitude list. So she was writing down all the things that she knew she was thankful for, and was actually wanted to celebrate them and to give thanks for those things, because it's always about maintaining balance, not just asking for guidance, but also being grateful for the things that we're being guided on. So how about shaking things up a bit? So doing something new, finding a new way of connecting with life energy. So simple things like reading or listening to things, maybe even a podcast about the spiritual life, to gain a new perspective. Spending time in nature, as many of you have heard me say often enough, that's really important, to allow yourself the space and the time to just sit in nature and actually absorb the energy of that life force. And allowing that creator nature to go through you, it's like self-care for the mind, body and soul. Another thing that we can do in our spiritual life is helping someone else. Some people overlook that, but helping other ones, it's a great antidote to being spiritually stuck, is serving someone else in a practical way, looking to help someone. So you're showing others love by showing them care. As we've mentioned before, sitting silently so that you can have, because I was talking about that for those who've already heard some of this, sitting quietly to ask, and you can, in that stillness, you're able to ask the creator what questions that you need to be answered, or things that you want to understand better about yourself. So you're able to have that reasoning, and the more you do these things, the more it's like tuning in a piano. The more you do this, the more that you'll be tuned in so that you can receive those messages clearly. But you have to go through this process, this uncomfortable process of tuning in. There are emotions that you won't want to deal with, because that tuning in isn't as smooth as you'd like it to be, because you really have to face that mirror. And sometimes some of the reflections you see are not quite so easy. But yes, tuning in means that you'll be able to be in harmony with the life force frequency. So clearing away clutter and distractions. So there's a lot of things that can clutter our spiritual lives. There's lots of addictive behaviors, or addictive or unhelpful behaviors. There are fears, there are unhealthy relationships, there are incomplete projects. Some of the projects are missions that we've been sent here to complete. So that those are those incomplete projects. There's why I'm clearing away the clutter also means mental noise. So learning to quiet down the mind so there isn't this battle, constant gibbering going on in your headspace. So, having that balanced and in order. So all that cleared out. And also look at what are the things, the key things that are cluttering? What are those key things that are taking up that much space in mental space for you? What are those things those behaviors, those unhealthy relationships, those addictive traits that we have? What do you fear? What are the incomplete projects? How do you the mental noise? So it's taking a look at what that cluttering is and ask, is this a good thing for me? So each area, look at, is this good for me? If it's not, then work on how to let that go, how to detox that from within your system. For some, it may also mean one of the other areas is we find many people going on spiritual retreats, or some people go away to somewhere where they can rest and actually allow rejuvenation to occur by going away somewhere and being in nature. So for some it's a spiritual retreat, for some it's going to the countryside and taking a few days out so that they can have that quiet time for refreshing and also for renewing themselves. Another one could be brainstorm a list of activities that make you feel alive, that actually excite you, that drive your energy. There's nothing worse than going through life mundanely doing things that are basically on a flat line for your energy, that don't actually bring any kind of joy to you. So and also are not developing you or developing your skills or the attributes that you have to fine tune them. Also, one of the final points I'm going to make is releasing guilt. We tend to get caught up in whether or not our actions are right or wrong. We've all made mistakes, but it is recognizing our mistakes and humbling ourselves and honestly dealing with the situation in order. And the reason why I'm saying dealing with those situations is in order to clear the stagnant, rotting energy that strains and also can create negative karmic effects. Now, I know that there are people who come into our lives for seasons and for a reason, but not for a lifetime. Some of you have heard those sentiments before. In various arenas. So yes, it's also being aware that sometimes we meet people because there is an area in our life which we need to address, and this person is like you've been sent a personal mentor, a reflection of that thing, so that you can see it within yourself and actually deal with it if you don't like what is being projected back to you. What would you say, Brother Theo?
Right. I was actually going to go back before you touched on the guilt aspect of it. Prior to that, you were saying the ways in which,
yes, the
positive ways,
yes.
And I kind of just wanted to go back to that because there were some very good things that you were mentioning there, particularly the connecting with nature aspect of it, and the young lady doing that gratitude list. So. Yeah. So the reason why I wanted to go back and kind of retread that area is that just to kind of extend beyond it and mention that. So you talked about shaking things up, changing the kind of because obviously what the personality comes down to is in a sense an enduring set of patterns.
Yes,
and behaviors and thinking. So those kind of things that interrupt that ever decreasing cycle of possibilities when you hold yourself into one kind of fixed mindset is a good thing to bring up. So just when you mention, for example, being kind and gracious to somebody, and I really like being a musician. When you started talking about tuning the piano, I thought, okay, right, okay. that one I definitely, because, you know, the spiritual cleansing element of reaching that clean space is, as you mentioned before, sometimes people find the spiritual aspects of things hard, but you're right to say that with anything else, even if you was just about to begin, for example, learning an instrument, at first, you know, you'll the quest is always to get better.
Yes.
The quest is always to get better. And sometimes, even in the process of learning something, irrespective of what it is, there's going to be little knockbacks. You'll make mistakes, but when you see a result coming together, then that gives the confidence to go to that step further and become more proficient. And it's no different in terms of, like you said, how we deal with each other interpersonally. You know, taking those first initial steps to do something that you've never been comfortable doing before, even if it's something as simple as a heartfelt apology to somebody. That first step has to be gotten over with until it becomes more, because what I was actually going to say is that with the nature bit you mentioned, that's you connecting, you know, to something spiritual, to something of creation that, you know, you weren't responsible for bringing about, you know, and you're actually even balled up in that same creation process. So in connecting with other things, you connect to yourself. In connecting to yourself, you connect to other things. I suppose the quest is always that. The most important one being that relationship with the Most High. If you can develop that to a great extent, then it's going to give you more of a proficiency in meeting other people on that kind of level as well.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, you've very well put. This is exactly it. And yes, it was so lovely, the what you just mentioned about this teenager, going back to the point. And it was quite inspiring to see such a young girl actually with her grandma making this gratitude list, and actually they were sticking it on the wall, you know, a little bit like when you're young, they stick your drawings on the around the you know, on the wall. This was a gratitude list, and I thought, wow, what a great gift to give your grandchild, to teach her to learn to be grateful for things and start to recognize the different elements within herself spiritually. I couldn't have given a child a greater gift. And I'd say in all of the points that I just touched on to do with so let me run through them again. So it was, you know, practicing gratitude, asking, you know, being at one with nature so that you can actually start to feel the creative energy and actually starting to commune with the Most High, shaking things up by doing something, finding a new way, I was saying, of connecting with life energy. So do something different that actually brings you joy. Find things that actually move you on a spiritual level. Find things that you actually tune in with. Help somebody. Have a conversation with the Creator. Create space to listen to that inner voice, that inner whispering that's trying to reach you. Clearing away the clutter, the distractions of things like addictive or unhelpful behaviors, fear, unhealthy relationships, incomplete projects, mental noise. And, you know, brainstorming a list of activities you like, releasing guilt. I was saying, by humbling ourselves and dealing honestly with the situation in order to clear away this stagnant, rotting energy. And I say definitely keep going. You know, it is a growth process. So you may, a little bit like building a business, you start small and consolidate. It's the same with your spiritual development. You have to start small, as in like a child developing. You know, you do the bum shuffle, then you crawl. Then after crawling, you semi walk by holding on to the sides of things and dropping, and then after a while you learn how to walk, after a while you learn how to run, and after a while you know how to operate all those functions. No different in the spiritual world, where you may start off as a babe who doesn't know how to crawl yet, but I say don't give up and keep going, you know, because when we're dialed into our emotions, we're more likely to be living with a clear sense of direction. Without self-reflection, we become disconnected from ourselves. So the Most High, not just ourselves, the Most High also, and other people, you know, could be family members, could be friends, and things. So we get lost and diverted from our vision and what our life purpose is. I mean, all of us have been given a set of gifts. Are we using them? And what is the Most High trying? When we're starting to feel uncomfortable with ourselves, I was once told, and the reason why I say that, I was once told when I was 12 years old by an 80-odd-year-old Chinese elder, who actually said to me, within this life, you have to follow your skill. If you do not follow your skill, you will never be at ease and never be happy. I was 12 years old when that was said to me. And I took what that man said very important. As I've grown older, I've realized what he means is walking in your spirit at all times. So, and I guess in this self-reflection, we also allow our hearts and minds to think and process the things that happen on a daily basis. We start to pay attention to the things beneath the surface of our life. So our feelings, our questions, our frustrations, our anger, our irritation, our happiness, our joy. We begin to understand what are all these different elements, because emotions are very transient, you know, they're not static. So that emotion, that energy that's moving through me for a short period of time, what is it? And for some people, they say that spiritual freedom is decolonializing, and really decolonizing to what? Decolonizing as equivalent to Africanizing. Which one is it? And should we really be looking to empty out one thing and replace it with another? Yes, we all want to be in tune with our cultural roots, but the most important thing, as I've understood, is to be in harmony with our spiritual self. So spiritual freedom, as in being in tune with the true essence of who you are, is most important. Theo?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to that because you was in my head, I think. So when you went back to the anecdote about, you know, always following your skill and taking that to be tantamount to traveling or walking in your spirit, and I thought, yeah, I was looking at it that very same way when you mentioned it, or I was just going to state it differently, and I thought, see, the ultimate skill then that you need to follow is, well, I shouldn't say you need to, but I'm just saying that ultimate skill, you know, is the skill to recognize that your innate ability to create.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Whatever that is, and if it's, you know, unfortunately, if a soul or the spirituality of a person is misdirected, then what they creating might not be so positive.
Yes.
But the whole premise behind the clean psychological space is then connecting with the idea that, you see, what is learned isn't necessarily taught in so much as it is acquired through means that can always be sharpened, like you said, enhanced, developed, and then pursuing the ultimate goal, not just for yourself but for
the greater, for everyone.
You see, so that's that's how I was actually seeing that whole thing there. So yeah, that's pretty much how I saw it all working.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with what you're talking about, where we're saying about following and being true to yourself, but it's also I like the fact that you touched on the domino effect, because if you're right with yourself, the world is also right with you, because that energy, you're pouring it out. So when you're pouring out that energy and people are in your presence, there's certain people that you interact with, and you feel that lift in your energy. And yes, it's very positive to be able to have an energy that causes other people's energy to lift up, so they operate differently in that space and time. And that's a very positive thing. And there is definitely going to be other parts to this conversation. Today we're just touching on the basis of it, which is what does it mean to have a spiritual freedom. And it's going back to the title of today's show, which is how do we live a clean psychological life, and what does it really mean to be spiritually free? And they do tie in together, because you cannot have one without the other.
I wanted to go back to the part about what I was thinking. Because he spoke about that change and then being kind to somebody, but it can begin as something as simple as just greeting somebody in the street, and you see what I mean, and
you'll see a change of dynamics now automatically.
Absolutely. The young lady who's doing the gratitude list, and as it's often said, gratitude leads to generosity. So if you have that arrangement between, even if it's just two people, then you have a cycle of gratitude, generosity. You have a cycle of what you call giving and receiving in a beneficial way. So
in a balanced way.
That's exactly that too. And so that's what they call, that's a micro of the macro situation.
Absolutely.
So that type of interaction there, on a consistent and persistent basis, then you'd be able to see the results of that course of action, as a matter of a general design of living.
Yeah, because you're making conscious decisions to try and get your emotions into a balanced state, and also understanding them, so that you can start to make choices of how you conduct yourself in different arenas. Now, for those who don't, and many of us have, we're all at different stages, but when we don't do that, what it's in fact saying is that we are allowing our emotions to lead us, and our emotions have been shaped by the wider world. So it's not spiritual shaping, it's an external shaping from the wider world, which means that we're not really still being true to ourselves, because we're not allowing ourselves to recognize the gift of emotion, and we're not allowing ourselves to actually be free, because spiritual freedom is such a blissful and beautiful thing to experience. And you meet people who are spiritually free, their energy is so high, and it's beautiful to see these people, because it's a great example of a mental state to be in, a clean psychological life, with very limited or negative karmic clutches. This is amazing, absolutely amazing to be able to reach that state. So in other shows, there will be parts 2, maybe part 3 also. We'll be looking at other parts of how to walk more towards a clean spiritual life. As I said at the beginning of the show, for those of you who've just joined me, there's more than one area that we'll be looking into. And one of those points that I touched on outside of this foundational thing is So today we looked a little bit at interpersonal relationships, but it's looking at the ego personality. That will be another show. And also when we're talking about things, it's also to take in consideration the historical and that context of inherited tendencies, and looking at certain experiences that we've had within the diaspora that can actually manifest in us today, because there is such a thing as inherited tendencies. So by that I mean, we're just going to say it's straight slavery in the Caribbean and its impact through the generations of certain behavior traits that have been normalized within many of our cultures, and they're directly in opposition with who we are spiritually. So I'm going to play for you 2 more tracks, because we've got about 10 minutes before the end of the show. And the first one that I'm going to play for you is Ras P and the Signal One Band. It's called In the House of the Father and In the House Dub. Here we go. This track is going out to Drea and also to Sis. going to play is called Shanti Yala, and it's entitled Humble Yourself.
Practice what you preach before it's too late.
Yeah, that was a wonderful track by Shanti Yala, and it's called Humble Yourself, because in order to, for the subject we were talking about today, about spiritual freedom within a clean psychological life. Now, we have to humble ourselves when we face our emotions. So it's a humbling process that we have to have in order to start addressing it. It can't be through an ego personality that we address these issues. We have to humble ourselves and be honest with who we are, and actually take on board those things from a clean perspective, rather than all these isms, schisms, and still not really being truthful to ourselves, because at the end of the day it's only ourselves that we're kidding. But as we've only got about 1 minute before the end of today's show, Brother Theo and I are going to actually say our goodbyes. And I hope you've all been really enjoying the sun. I'll let you go ahead first, Theo.
Well, yeah, it's been all too short, I'm afraid. I was really.
There's going to be round two.
I was really getting into that. I just want to say, wonderful. I appreciate you having me on the show.
You're very welcome.
And I appreciate being able to speak to the blessed listeners, and a good evening and to all of them. The last thing I just want to say, the last thing you mentioned about the humbling of self.
Yes.
And I'm just taking it from an angle there where I guess it shouldn't really be seen as being submissive or subservient in any sense. It's more, I kind of see it more as a way of actually humbling yourself. It's a different spin on the whole wording of it. It's actually humbling those restrictions,
yes,
those false ideas that you think of yourself. That's the humbling element of it. So you're actually bringing under control things that would not necessarily be balancing for you, or you know what I mean,
absolutely,
or connecting for you. That's just a context in which I see the whole expression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's very, as I was saying, thank you, Theo, for that. It's very important to be able to first have a space of recognition, and secondly, as the track just said by Shantiella, to humble yourself so that you can start to address those different arenas and actually be on your development, spiritual, clean, positive spiritual development, so that you have a balanced state, spiritual state, and actually are walking in the trueness of who you are. Now, I've literally gone 1 minute over my time, so I'd like to thank the blessed listeners for lending us your ears for the last 2 hours, and I hope you've all been enjoying the wonderful weather. Finally, we're getting some real sun. This is fantastic. I hope you've had a great week. Have a fantastic weekend, because it's set to be good weather, so they say. And for those of you who are travelling out of London or even out of these waters, have a pleasant journey and a wonderful week ahead, and give thanks again for Blessed Radio, for Blessed Management, and for the Most High for clearing the path that we could actually have this presentation. So the last track I'm going to play for you is Kabir Al Amlak, and it's called Mental Freedom Dub.
No cigarette smoking in my room. Yeah. I still want Marley. Bless FM radio, play good tunes.